Drew Elliott. And Drew joins us now on the phone. Good morning, Drew. How are you?
I'm doing great, Henry. Hope you are.
I'm hearing great things about the new website, jonesandblunt.com. Tell us about the site. How did it come about, and what's the goal? What are you after with the new website?
Well, jonesandblunt.com was really a creature of my friend Donna King and I, who Donna worked at the legislature, and I was working in the executive branch, as you said, and we really saw a need for more coverage of state government. The media resources are going down, as you and your listeners probably know, especially newspapers, but other media as well. And the coverage, it's not that the coverage is necessarily bad. It's that there's not as much of it as there used to be, and there's not as much of it as there needs to be. As there's gridlock in Washington, there is more happening in state capitals, more that affects people day to day. And so we wanted to bring a window in on what is happening in Raleigh. And we're insiders ourselves. We provide an insider's perspective, but I hope we also provide it in a way that really helps people around the state understand what's going on in Raleigh and how that affects them.
That's what I really like about your site, Drew. I get things there that I wouldn't get otherwise because you guys are so connected, and you've got your hands and fingertips on all the things that are going on a minute-to-minute basis in Raleigh. So when something happens, you guys are going to pretty much know about it before the News and Observer, I think. And that's what I really like about going to your site. So congratulations on the launch. One of the things I presume you'll be writing about a lot this week is the fact that the legislature is back in session starting today after a week's vacation. They started a week's vacation Thursday a week ago for 4th of July and said they would return to Raleigh today on July 13th. And so they'll be coming back to town today. And the big news, of course, is what are they going to do about the disagreements in the budgets. The governor released his budget, then the House released their budget, and there were some differences between the governor's budget and the House budget. But when the Senate released their budget a few weeks ago, it was like drastically different. And so now what happens if people don't know how the process works? There'll be a conference committee appointed by the leadership in both houses, and the governor's office will be in the room as well. And you'll probably have about, 15, 20 people hammering out a negotiated budget. Is that about right?
That's about right, and those conferees haven't been appointed yet, but the reality is that the real decisions will probably be made by an even smaller group than that. That just seems to be how things happen in Raleigh. But what the legislature did right before they left town is pass what's called a continuing resolution that funds the government past the end of the fiscal year, which was June 30. What they decided to do was just fund it until August 14th. So that's the new deadline for getting a budget out. And as you pointed out, there are a lot of differences in the Senate budget and the House and the governor's budget. But I will point out that the Senate, in terms of overall spending, the Senate is much closer to the governor's budget than the Going budget.
Yeah, the House budget actually was over 6% more new spending this year, which is going to be one of the bones of contention. Is the big issue going to be revenue? The Senate came out with a totally different approach to revenue. They want more tax cuts. Senator Bob Rucho, who's become kind of the guru of the tax plan on the Senate side. He's a powerful senator from Mecklenburg County, and he wants more tax cuts again. He wants to take the personal income tax rate down again. Of course, we went from 7.75 to 5.75 as the max, and I think he wants to take it even down lower than that in this session. There were also some new taxes that that a lot of us in the radio and television and newspaper industry don't like, including a tax on all advertising, taxes on veterinarians, taxes on automobile repair. All of that came out of the Senate. It was a surprise, hasn't been vetted, hasn't been talked about, was never discussed on the floor of the Senate. And then you got all this new taxation coming out of the Senate in the name of lowering the personal income tax. So isn't it kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul when you lower taxes over here, but you come up with all these new taxes on the other side?
Well, I suppose you could call it that, but frankly, Henry, it's also what these people said they were going to do when they were elected. They said, we're going to go in, we're going to lower taxes, broaden the base, and lower the rate. And that's exactly what they did last time in the tax package. And and the Senate is saying we need to keep the pressure on. The tax cuts worked last time. We've got a surplus, and we need to do more of this. It's working. What the governor and the House seem to be saying is, well, the governor said it explicitly. Let's step back a little bit, see how these pretty major changes we've made in tax policy are going to work in the medium term, and then we'll talk about more cuts. Now, you also have to remember that in the original tax cut package that did pass, there were further tax rate reductions baked into that legislation. So even if nothing happens, income taxes are still going to go down.
Yeah.
Corporate income taxes. Now, what the Senate is doing is saying we want to lower personal income taxes, and to do that, we want to broaden the base and, as you pointed out, tax some things that hasn't been taxed before. And as you rightly predicted and has shown, those whose ox is being gored are not happy that that they're the ones who the tax is being broadened onto. But the Senate has also continued the trend of raising the standard deduction, which helps lower income taxpayers. So you wouldn't pay a tax on the first, I think it's $18,400 worth of income if the Senate plan passed.
I will add this one point about the advertising tax. It's not just the industry that is opposing this advertising tax. People like John Hood, some of the smartest conservative thinkers in the state, are saying it's bad for the state. It's bad business. I mean, the state of Florida put in an advertising tax years ago, and literally it crashed the economy down there, and they ended up having to go back in session, a special session, 6 months later, and fix it. So, there's a lot of
politics is the art of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing with the medical expenses deduction. That was passed as a part of the tax package last time, and it looks very. We're seeing a lot of signs that will be rescinded, and
they're going to fix that, right, especially for senior citizens, because a lot of senior citizens ended up paying higher personal income tax, because they did away with those deductions for their medical expenses.
And so as a proportion of their expenses, medical expenses are much higher than those of us who might be a little younger and a little healthier.
Drew Elliott from jonesandblunt.com on the telephone with us. Jonesandblunt.com covers state politics. If you haven't discovered Jones and Blunt yet, you need to get on board and start reading it every day. Drew, the other big issue that you can't get away from is Medicaid reform, and that's another part of what's going to be discussed in this conference committee room for the next month or so. Are they going to finally get a deal on changing Medicaid in North Carolina?
Well, there are two questions. One is, are they going to get a deal at all? And two is, does it come in the budget? What the Senate did was put, not just with Medicaid reform, but put a lot of policy changes, the tax changes that we've talked about, and Medicaid reform into the budget itself, into the budget bill. So that forces the issue of whether they're going to be discussed. And one of the things we'll see in Raleigh in the upcoming weeks is how much of that, of what the policy changes that the Senate put in the budget, how much of that is going to be spun out into separate bills, as the governor and the House would like to see. Let's debate these. Let's talk about them, but let's not do it as part of the budget bill. The budget should be about how much money the government spends each year and how we spend it. And so they'd like to see it a little cleaner. So how many of those arguments are going to be had in the budget? How many are going to be had separately? But I think Medicaid is something that there is definitely an appetite for reform. The Senate has their plan, which the governor very much does not like, in terms of how it tries to control costs. And this is a discussion that's happening all across the country, and it's not unique to North Carolina, but it's something that's very important because in Raleigh it's called the Pac-Man, the Medicaid Pac-Man. Each year, Medicaid spending consumes as a percentage more and more of the state budget. And where you'd think that education would be the number one spending item, and it is, it's getting smaller and smaller because Medicaid is getting larger and larger.
Drew Elliott from jonesandblunt.com on the telephone with us. Well, what are the other big stories you're going to be covering? I know the lawsuit, the governor sued Senator Phil Berger on the question of taking away his appointment authority on certain appointments, and that is that actually with the Supreme Court? Is that where that's going to be decided now?
It is. At the end of June, there were oral arguments before the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, and we've got an article about it on jonesandblunt.com. Governor Hunt, Governor Martin came out to support Governor McCrory, and then the Senate and the legislature had their lawyers there, and essentially what the argument boils down to is how much authority does the state constitution give to the governor? And the legislators' lawyers actually argued in response to a question from one of the justices. It was fascinating. They actually, one of the justices asked the lawyer, in your view, under the state constitution, could the legislature appoint cabinet secretaries for the governor?
Phil Berger probably said yes.
The governor's own cabinet secretaries. And the lawyer said, he hemmed and hawed just a little bit, but he in the end he said, yes, we do believe that the Constitution gives us that authority. Now, he's not saying that they would do that. Current law doesn't require it to be that way, but this is a big case in terms of the separation of powers, and that's what Jim Hunt said when we talked to him after the oral arguments. He said, what this is about is the governor is the only one who's elected by everybody in North Carolina,
right,
who chooses to vote, and should he have, if he's going to go back and face the voters saying I did what I said I was going to do, or I didn't, he should have the authority to run the executive branch.
You know, it's funny. We keep hearing that Phil Berger and Pat McCrory still have breakfast once a week and talk through state issues. Do you think they ever talk about, hey, let's talk about our lawsuit where I'm suing you? Does that ever come up at breakfast over there at the executive mansion? Probably not.
I don't know. I mean, they do have agreement on a broad range of issues. And in general, it's the conflicts that we hear about. Right. I mentioned that the Senate and the governor are very much in line in terms of the spending level. It's just what you spend it on that matters. The governor had some smaller items that legislature has picked up. The two that I say that really are waiting in the wings for him that he's pushing for big are the infrastructure bonds and the highway bonds. The two bonds that he's calling for, and then business incentives.
Yeah, that's right. And we're about to run out of time. I'll get you back. We'll talk more about the bond situation. Nobody really knows where that's going to go. They'll probably be dealing with that or not dealing with it this week. I mean, the conventional wisdom right now is that if there's going to be a bond, it's going to be smaller than $3 billion and probably won't deal with transportation, is what I'm hearing. Is that what you're hearing as well?
Well, what I know is that there's certainly much broader agreement on the infrastructure bonds than on the highway bonds.
Right, yeah, that's what I hear
too.
The
Senate has really held up a stop sign on the highway bonds themselves, but there's pretty broad agreement on the infrastructure bonds.
Drew, we got like 1 minute. I wanted to ask you about the fact that public policy polling out of Raleigh, and again, we always preface public policy polling stories with saying the left-leaning public policy polling is promoting a poll that came out last week that says that Donald Trump is leading Republican voters for the Republican primary by a few percentage points, 16% for Trump, 12% for Scott Walker, Jeb Bush, and Mike Huckabee has 11%. Do you buy that?
It's when you get into the polling and who's doing the polling,
That was a nice way of me. That was a nice way of me asking you. Do you believe anything public policy polling says about Republicans?
Well, they've definitely got. They definitely have
an agenda.
Released polls in the past that haven't quite captured where it is. But a poll this early. With that many candidates, you can get any kind of crazy result.
Yeah.
And what it says to me is, at this point in a race, name ID is king. And who in the world has better name ID than Donald Trump?
All right, listen, this has been very good and insightful. I'd like to start using you as one of our contributing folks from Raleigh from time to time, if you don't mind, because you're bringing great insight, and I love your new website. We didn't get a chance to talk about. I know there's some other things that you got a great op-ed that ran this week from Heritage on the offshore drilling issue. People should go read that. And go read Drew's stuff on jonesandblunt.com. It's a new website out of Raleigh. Drew, thank you so much for being on. I'm sorry we ran out of time. So many great things to talk about. We got to get you back on.
I'm available anytime for you, Henry.
Okay, Drew. Talk to you soon. Drew Elliott. jonesandblunt.com. Check it out and start going there daily to get your daily dose of state politics.